Heritage Day evening seminar entitled The Changing Face of Ballina Before and After the Civil War. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on what has been obviously a day, if you were here earlier, for a very good Heritage Day. So thank you for being here tonight. Apologies for being a bit late, but that's because a lot of people have come in, which is great again to see so many people interested in this topic. Just a few formalities before we start. The fire exits, if we do have the emergency need of them, are at the back and at the sides. And we'll ask you, if you have a mobile phone now, even if you think you've turned it off or turned on silent, can you check, everyone check their phones to make sure they are on silent, please. Just to let you know, we will have an interval, and I'll talk to you more about that. So there will be a break where you can go and have teas and coffees in about an hour's time, and obviously go to the toilet as well and stuff like that. You can do all that separate, of course. First, before we start, because at the end we frequently go out and forget, I want to say thank you. So I want to say thank you especially to the Ballina 2023 project, especially Lisa Halnan, the project manager, and Anne-Marie Flynn, the marketing manager. They have been fantastic. They're still doing amazing work all this year. Joe Biden's visit isn't an accident. That's in many ways down, instigated by the Ballina 2023 project. So they've done fantastic work, and I'm very, very thrilled and happy that they have helped with this particular seminar. I want to thank the Ballina Salmon Festival and the Ballina Arts Centre, of course, where we are, Jackie Clark Collection, the Western People and James Laffey for helping promote this event, Mayo County Council, Mayo Decade of Centenary Scheme, and of course the beautiful historians here on my left, Terry Reilly, David Hicks and Sinéad Mitchell Brennan. You can tell which one is Terry immediately. I'd also like to thank the North Mayo West Sligo Heritage Society and Angela Wallace, who you'll see in a second. And I also thank you, the audience, for arriving. And I'm aware I never said who I was. My name is Liam Alex Heffron, and more about me anon. The name of this seminar is The Changing Face of Ballina Before and After the Civil War. And the question is, why? Why are we having this talk? It's 300 years from the founding of Ballina. And I keep forgetting to press this button, so that's another... There we are, okay. So it's 300 years from the founding of Ballina, but yet Ardnaree is much older. So this is an area that has a long, extended history right back into the past, well over 1,000 years. And the question is, why are we doing these events? The answer really is, history, especially local history, is not being taught. Once upon a time, grannies and granddads would sit kids on their knees or chat to themselves by the fireside or go to the pub or go at Behantiocht in each other's houses and talk about the old times. That doesn't happen anymore. In many respects, that generation has now left. If there's one or two of the old people, as they call them, still left, very few of them have that sense of history. So it's very much an era that's passed us by. And it's now incumbent on us, I think, to try and delve more into this local history. Because local history is not national history. It's not the history that you read generally in school books. This local history matters to the local people and the ground you walk on, the buildings that you see, the ground that you can touch. That's local history, and the people have gone before you. We, in our turn, will become local history as we move on and the next generations go by. It's also 100 years since the ending of the Civil War. And the Civil War very much marked a rubicon in Irish society, where what went before, which was the British state, turned into the Free State and ultimately the Republic. And it was the start and end of an era. But if you take the Civil War in the context of the overall 300 years of Ballina history, it's only a small thing. There's a much more broad expanse of history that we're going to go through here tonight. And so in many respects, the Civil War has a minor role in that. But it does mark that Rubicon, that change from one era to another. And finally, history is often misused. They say if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think reality is, history is much more nuanced than we understand. Because if you think about it, everyone's lives is much more nuanced than what might overtly be the case if you described your ordinary day. If you delve down deeper, going to the shop, meeting someone, buying a bar of chocolate, coming home, is filled with those incidentals of life. The person that you met, the person that didn't wave at you, the guy that cut you off in traffic, the woman who said, how are you, instead of hello. Or, there's all those things that happen. There's nuance, those little bits that describe and make up what it is to be a human. And secondly, history, if we don't know it, is often hijacked by political agendas, by media, and often now by social media, where it's fed into sound bites. So I think that's why it's important that we all collectively should come to these events, discuss them. And what I would say is ask questions. Anything any of us here say tonight, never take it as gospel. Never let anyone tell you something that you say you must believe that. Because there's nothing. As a lecturer in NUI Galway, I've just finished my PhD there. I've learned I know less about things than when I started. I think that's the ultimate thing of a PhD. You know less than when you started it a few years ago. Although my mother would disagree with that. She reckons I know everything. But the point is that challenge everything. If you find something you don't believe or think you can't accept it, ask questions, debate, and do your research. Because history needs to stimulate that. And tonight, what I hope our 4 different talks will help stimulate you into thinking more about research and thinking more about what happened. And I said, don't have to agree with us, but if we stimulate that research, that debate, that's all we need. So, I get the hang of this eventually. All right, so the format of tonight is we're going to have my introduction, which is literally just this. I'm going to bring up Angela Wallace, the chairperson of the North Mayo West Sligo Heritage Group, to say a few words for a few minutes about the Heritage Group. That's me then going to talk to you for a little bit, and then Sinéad will also give her talk. We'll have a break for toilets and a raffle, and the raffle will be in aid of the North Mayo West Sligo Heritage Group. And then after the break, we'll have David and Terry with a short Q&A afterwards. The event has been recorded and will be put on the Ballina 2023 website at a later stage. You never think I was an engineer, would you? No, you wouldn't. Right, so I'm going to ask Angela to come up. Angela is chairperson of the North Mayo West Sligo Heritage Group. And I would just say, as she's coming up here, this Heritage Group, in its incarnation before, which was called the North Mayo Archaeological Society, I believe. Thanks, buddy. When I was a kid going to the Ballina Library, I remember getting the periodicals, and they stimulated my interest in local history. And this group has stayed in some facet, has stayed together, plugging away behind the scenes, doing their bit to try and promote local history in West Sligo and North Mayo. They're fantastic people, and they really get so little coverage, so little help. And it's my honour to have Angela here tonight just to explain a little bit more of the society. But I wouldn't be here probably now, only for the periodicals brought out by the society all those years ago. So I'll let you, Angela, for a few minutes, and I'll come back.
Thanks very much, Liam, and thanks a million for inviting us here this evening to quickly plug our group. Really appreciate it, and also organising a raffle and everything for us. We're delighted. My name is Angela Wallace. I moved to this area about 15 years ago, working in the Cage of Fields. I'm an archaeologist, and I was lucky enough, while living out in Enniscrone, to meet Paddy and Chris Tuffy, who were very involved in the group and have been instrumental in keeping it going over the last few years. It was originally the North Mayo Archaeological and Historical Society, and then with various things that happened, it was very active for a long time. Great journals, great articles, and great members involved, working incredibly hard over the years. It had kind of faded out for a few years, and then it was reincarnated again by Paddy and Jim Henry and Carmel Hughes and Jacqueline, and renamed the North Mayo West Sligo Heritage Group. And the guys have been working incredibly hard over the years. I've kind of come in and out of the group over the years. I won't take credit because these Jim Henry, Carmel Hughes and Paddy Tuffy have been instrumental really in keeping it going. And I think many of you probably know them over the years because they've been incredibly generous with advice and support to other community groups in the town who also have done various items promoting history and heritage over the years. But this group has been consistently focused on heritage, and as a group they have organised talks and walks and events over the years, and they're a constant font of knowledge and support and advice when it comes to all things history and heritage in the area. Things got difficult to keep the group going during COVID, and it was hard to kind of keep the committee together. The guys would like to get new committee members especially on board to help us out with organising events. We really do need people to come onto our committee to keep it going, and I'd really appeal to the audience here tonight please consider it. We were going to leave a list outside the door with the girls selling the books, and if anyone's interested, please put down your names and your emails and phone numbers. If you're just interested in going on a mailing list, put your name down. If you're interested in coming on the committee, just please put an asterisk beside your name, and we're hoping to see a few asterisks this evening. So yeah, this is one of the events we organised through on Heritage Week. We got a grant from the Heritage Council to do a big dig for kids, which was very popular. This is a talk Jim Henry organised there last year in the Glasgow Kennedy Centre, which was very well attended. Myself, Paddy worked with me last year, and we did a video of various castles along the Moy, which we were really happy with and got great feedback from it. This is here at Castle Connor. Paddy just has so much knowledge about all the castles and sites around the area. I'm just going to quickly plug some of the archaeological sites. I know the recent events are focused on more recent history. These are just some sites all around Ballina that I love and just have great significance for the town and the early settlement in the town. I'm sure some of you know them well. Actually, the League Cemetery, the rock, the cross-inscribed stone there, which reminds us of the early Christian origins of the town, and Kilmore Moy Church. Then we have Ardnaree Abbey and the Dolmen in Ballina. There's some amazing wealth of archaeological sites. Heritage, though, is not just archaeology. I'm just to focus on the group. We have a very well-structured committee. A lot of work went into setting up a constitution for the group. A few people were amazing and came on board and helped out with that. We're registered on the Mayo PPN network, so we are a formally registered group and have some experience in grant applications. Again, we really need people to come on board and help us out with paperwork. Heritage can mean many things to many different people, and as I'm sure loads of you have seen here today, where there's loads of crafts represented. Paul Carabine has been great at bringing in loads of different craftspeople for Heritage Day, and that's a really important part of celebrating heritage. It's also folklore, industrial heritage, architectural heritage. Martin Leonard, I know, has been doing great work around the town with promoting the architectural heritage and conservation. With the riverine heritage, the castles all along the river, archaeology, local history. It's many different things to many different people. So coming on board in the group and helping us to promote and highlight and working together as a team, I think a lot can be achieved. We do have a Facebook page. Unfortunately, I put a lot of work into it. It got hacked. So when you look up the North Mayo West Sligo Heritage Group, it's been hacked by all these Space Invader things. I set up another page. It hasn't really got much traction. I got very disheartened by my by being hacked. So if anyone can like and share the new page and plug it any way you can, I'd be very grateful. We'd also love to get techie people on board who'd help us set up an online presence. Our Irish Heritage platform offers free support and advice to community groups and allows them to set up a web presence. So that's a fantastic resource, but we do need people to do posts for us, help us with social media, help us with a website. Liam has kindly digitised some of the back journals, so it would be great to get a website up and running and get them all up online. So that's me finished, I think, and thank you very much for inviting me along, Liam, and best of luck with the talks tonight. Thanks a million, everybody.
Thanks very much, Angela, and thank you for audience for being receptive to that. Right, so my name is Liam Alex Heffron, as I mentioned. I have just finished my PhD at NUI Galway, University of Galway now called, and I did my MA there as well. So I'm a historian and also an actor who you may have seen on Fair City, so it's a weird mix, but it works, I think. I think it works anyway, we'll see how it goes. My PhD was on the revolution in North Mayo, and in particular, I'm fascinated by Ballina. I'm from a small village out the road called Magana, but my mum is from Ballina, so I've always had a strong connection with the town. Ballina is the most important town in Mayo. There you go. I've said it, so there, it's true. Thank you. Thank you, I finished then. And that's the end of the lecture. Moving on. Okay. To understand Ballina, and I'll come back to why it is the most important town in Mayo. Don't worry, I won't just leave it hanging there. North Mayo actually is quite isolated, and it's kind of hard to understand now with modern roads and everything, and the maps don't do it justice. But here's a quote from it's Joseph Stock, the Bishop of Killala, the famous landing of the French in Killala. And he says in his diary that when the French landed, the panic that went through the Protestant community, because they saw North Mayo was cut off from the rest of Ireland, in front by the sea and behind by a cordon of mountains, out of which only 2 passages are continually guarded by the rebels. And those passages were through Foxford and over towards West Sligo, towards onto Sligo town. And they felt very much trapped in North Mayo. And we can see this in this map. This is one of the earliest modern maps of Mayo. It's Ball's map. And you may see there the mountains. I think, by the way, this map is on the County Mayo Library website. It's amazing. But you can see the mountains that form a ridge to the bottom there. That basically cuts off North Mayo from the rest of Ireland and the county. And that, you can't see it, but that continues into Sligo. And that bit in the middle, which there doesn't seem to be any mountains there, it's kind of grey, that's actually a vast tract of bogland that separates Erris from what's called Tyrawley. So Tyrawley is the hinterland of North Mayo around Ballina. So in actual fact, Ballina is the hub of an area that's very cut off from the rest of the country. And that has very much, in some respects, created a distinctiveness, an independence, I would argue, in Ballina and its surrounding hinterland. So, to understand very quickly a contextual history of Ballina. So essentially, we have, after the Cromwellian plantations and all that happened in the 17th century, in the 18th century, we entered that there was no urban settlement in North Mayo. In fact, Foxford was founded in 1683, and that was, Foxford became the administrative hub for North Mayo in particular. All that was in North Mayo, from an urban point of view, was a small fishing port at Killala. That was it. James O'Hara, the second Baron Tyrawley, he established Ballina essentially in 1723, and he started giving out leases to create our market town that we see here today. Again, Ardney was already here, but actual market, commercial, planned town started in 1723. And very quickly, merchants, landed gentry, and prosperous farmers started taking up these leases. The Goers eventually acquired the lands from the O'Haras and married into the Knoxes of Rappa Castle, which became the Gore Knoxes of Beleek Manor. So you'll be familiar with that in a few minutes. But here's the thing, how fast it grew is emblematic. Frequently you ask someone to say, how busy is a town? And typically they'd say, oh, there's 7 pubs in it, or there's 8 pubs in it. Well, in actual fact, within 3 years of Ballina being officially founded, there was 27 breweries in the town, which kind of indicates it was heading in a direction. In 1748, the revenue officers were still complaining, though, that Ballina was in a large tract of country and uncivilized people. So North Mayo was, some would argue still is, was termed as uncivilized, a vast tract of uncivilized land. And so very much Ballina felt like a frontier town in some respects. The Georgian tiger boom, they call the historians are a great way with phrases. 1747 to 1815, that saw a huge boom in the Irish economy. And we saw the population of Ireland increase by over 500%. And Ballina also benefited from this prosperity because North Mayo, the hinterland around Ballina, was very fertile. And very quickly, the new planters realised this potential. And Ballina benefited. And always the hinterland of Ballina is very much linked in to the town of Ballina. So this agricultural prosperity fueled the growth of Ballina. And Arthur Young noted in 1776 of the salmon fishery being the most considerable in the kingdom. And that's significant. The salmon fishery then drove a lot of the economy locally. This is what I mean by the hinterland. If you can see there, Ballina in the middle of the map. So these are the parishes around Ballina, and they depend on Ballina and they would have very much depended on Ballina for their well-being. And Ballina was very much the market town where they got produce and also sent produce. Exports, oats, cattle, sheep, imports, all came through essentially Ballina. And even into West Sligo. This is the thing people don't realise. It's not just North Mayo, it's also West Sligo. Because West Sligo has always looked to Ballina as their town, not into Sligo. So you find people in Eastkey would regard Ballina as their town. And that's the thing. So we need to understand that Ballina sits in this hub. Also to note that Erris is actually not really connected to Ballina. In fact, that vast tract of bog I mentioned to you cuts off Erris from the rest of North Mayo, or at least did at the time. So we find that literally that area around Ballina, that hinterland, is very much dependent on Ballina, but it's very much a separate cut-off entity from the rest of the county and the rest of the country. So, 19th century Ballina, there was a building boom from 1830 to 1842, and we find even at that point, Ballina Manor, this palatial manor, I don't know if you've gone down and seen it, but even at the time, to imagine how vast this was, the huge grounds as you go in through the gate all the way through to the house itself. So Ballina Manor was constructed by Colonel Francis Arthur Gore. Ballina became the third largest town in Connacht and had a population in 1831 of almost 8,000 people, which was quite amazing for the time. Newspapers began continuously publishing in Ballina from 1823. And here's the thing, the development of the town was integral to the willingness of the landed gentry, the Protestant middlemen, the professionals and the Catholic merchants to work together to develop their town. And this is where I think this idea of we're on our own comes into play. They very much saw the town as their town, and they were willing to invest their money, and they had it, into developing the town. And many of the buildings you see in the main streets today date from that period. Then you find in late 1820s, the town council set up, initially to look after lighting and that type of thing. So they were set up in 1828, so the town council or town commissioners come to play. In 1840, the Ballina Poor Law Union, as with all the other poor law unions, was set up. This is the first example, if you like, of local governments, aside from the town councils, coming to play in Ireland. When Ireland was divided up into a series of poor law unions, ostensibly to look after the poor in their union. And Ballina Union was the largest in Ireland, extended from Ballina all the way through to Belmullet. And there was a problem with that. It was way too big and unwieldy. And unfortunately, the famine showed that up. And after the famine, in 1849, the famine wasn't even over really, but in 1849, they had to divide the union up into three: Killala Union, Belmullet Union, and Ballina Union, in order to cope. And in many respects, many people died during the famine because it was way too big. People trying to travel all the way from Erris into Ballina just wasn't feasible, especially if you were dying from malnutrition or disease. So, coming on to my point of why Ballina is the most important town in Mayo. Well, this wasn't me saying it. This was a guy called Walker in his Handbook of Ireland. And he said in 1873, I love this phrase, in point of trade, extent, population and improvement, Ballina is the most important town in Mayo. Ballina at this stage, remember, it was the largest town, easily, third largest in Connacht. Ballina was actually linked to the rail network only in 1873. And we find then in 1880s, as Parnell is coming to prominence and the land war is happening, we find home rulers dominating the poor law union. Whereas before it was the gentry, now we find that the home rulers are dominating. The gentry still hang on and hold on to their officerships because they don't need to be elected. If you have money, you don't have to be elected onto the... if you've landed gentry, I should say, you don't have to be elected onto these local government bodies. But in 1898, radical change happens, where you have the Local Government Act. It did two things. It created a system of self-government replacing the poor law unions. You had county councils, rural district councils, and urban district councils. So the rural district councils replaced the poor law unions, and they looked after the rural areas, as in the title. The urban district councils replaced the town commissioners. So Ballina had an urban district council, and Ballina had a rural district council, which looked after, it met in Ballina, but looked after the rural area. Again, those parishes you saw earlier on, it looked after a lot of those parishes. It also saw the boundary of Mayo extend to, if you remember where we saw it on the map earlier on, originally Ardnaree, much as they hate to be reminded, were in Sligo. This brought Ardnaree into Mayo, those changes. So in 1898, it brought, I said, a whole swathe of Sligo became part of Mayo. But in reality, Ardnaree had always been part of the town of Ballina. It was considered in one municipal entity. We find wealthy nationalist merchants, such as Arthur Muffany, Bernard Egan, they become political leaders. And this becomes important because they find their expression of their leadership through these local government bodies. Now, this is where I get to the idea of the independent spirit of Ballina. I described to you more or less a potted history of where we got to Ballina, but this distinctive character, and people who are not from Ballina, maybe even people from Ballina, might argue that's not true. But I think there is a distinctiveness, a distinctive independence about people from Ballina. We find in the Times newspaper, noting this independence, So back in 1910, when Home Rule was at its zenith, when it looked like we're heading into an era where Home Rule was going to be given, Redmond was popular, and he was going to become the next essentially messiah of Irish politics. And Bernard Egan, the man I mentioned before, the local merchant, stood up against the nominated Daniel Boyle in the election in Mayo North constituency. And Daniel Boyle had never been to Mayo up to that point until canvassing. He was an alderman in, I believe it's Liverpool, but could be Manchester, I can't remember now off the top of my head. But he was over there, and he was picked specially by John Redmond to stand in Mayo. And Bernard Egan, as a local man, he was a nationalist, but he stood because he was local. And he barely got defeated. I think it was 40 votes was the difference. And that was an amazing thing. John Redmond's hand-picked man nearly lost a seat by 40 votes. And the Times newspaper noted, North Mayo has always been an independent constituency. And I think this goes back to a lot of things. Number one, it goes back to resident gentry. What I mean by that is, it makes a difference if your landlords lived in the community or didn't. Not always. There were some really bad bastards, don't get me wrong. But there were some good people too. When I think of bad, I think of Palmer. I've done a PhD on him, and really, it takes a while to get over the things that happened under his watch and his estates. But Colonel Sir Francis Arthur Knox-Gore was not one of those people. He was a man who lived in Ballina, and he cared about Ballina. But also, I want to quote this. I know death by PowerPoint when you read off what's there, but I think this line is important. On the eve of the famine, when they were discussing public health measures and public works, he said, "We must have another plan to make our land more productive and to give the labourer more interest in the land, to give him a cabin. Were we passing along a road and sudden shower to overtake us, would it not be delight to the occupier of the cabin in which we would take shelter to think that cabin was his own?" And he said it to other landlords, saying to them, I believe labourers who are literally renting year by year off farmers, not even off landlords themselves, security of their own home. He also, during the famine, did a huge amount of relief work. He forgave rent, didn't carry out evictions, and noted he actually relied on the wasteland only. In other words, the land that people had emigrated from. He relied on cultivating that land to clothe his food and family and give up carriages, wine, and other luxuries. I've long since given them up. We also find that cross-community ventures were a thing in Ballina. What I mean by that is you had Protestant gentry, Protestant professionals, and Catholic gentry, Catholic farmers, and coming together in cross-community ventures. And not just that, this is at the cutting edge of new innovation. Isaac Beckett introduced electricity in 1890 by using 3 turbines on the River Moy. Arthur Muffany himself was a humanitarian businessman, he was a social radical, and he was also a land reform advocate. We'll come to him in a second. Landlords Robert and Christopher Guy Oram established the first motor car service in Ireland between Ballina and Enniscrone. And they cross-community support. In the background is actually the newspaper cutting of the meeting they had. And everyone was at this, supporting them. Also, flipping the coin, Ballina town suffered the most, and Terry would come to this perhaps. Ballina would suffer the most during World War I, casualties in County Mayo. And then, when you think, oh, that must mean that they're a Shonin town, that perhaps they were full of unionists, that you might get, that might be an easy soundbite to say. But then you find in 1922, the Ballina streets were changed to more patriotic Republican names by the Urban District Council, the opposite to what you might think a Shonin town would do. And then you find in the 1930s, the Ballina Urban District Council built 447 units of social housing. It was the largest project in Ireland, and Ballina UDC did it. So there's a lot of elements here of the community working together, again, in innovative ways to develop Ballina. And politically, they were independent. And this is very interesting, I think, anyway. If you recall, those of you who know, when Parnell's affair with Catherine O'Shea, Kitty O'Shea was a derogatory term that was used against her, but when that was found out, the Catholic Church weren't too keen, as you may have recollected from history. But Ballina, against the clergy, against the bishop, were stubbornly Parnellite. Bernard Egan was a strong supporter of Parnell, and remains so. And you find that Ballina's continued to be supportive of Parnell despite his travails and his scandals. And you find that, again, Bernard Egan, he certainly was a trier. He went up against Daniel Crilly in 1892 and 1895. Daniel Crilly was anti-Parnell, and he won. But each time, Bernard Egan's pulled 40% of the vote, a significant block of the vote. And that was throughout all of North Mayo. Ballina was majority Parnellite. It was probably the rural areas that took him down. Prosperous industrialist and grocer Arthur Muffany was an amazing man. If you go down to Dunn Stores and the Walls, you read more about him down there. But he was really, truly amazing. He was a businessman. He was a grocer, very successful. But he also linked up outside the town with the ordinary farmers who were fighting in the land war, holding on to their evicted plots. And he supported them, radically supported them, led speeches and marches. He was also a humanitarian who built houses for those people who were evicted or lived in tenements. He also was the one who insisted on building the Humbert Memorial Monument, one of the ones, in 1898, 1899. I said to someone recently about the monument being built, and they go, oh, fair play. And I said, but can you imagine? It's the British state. You're putting in place this huge monument, inviting French representatives to come over, celebrating the invasion by the French 100 years later, and you're still in the British state. Like, that hasn't changed at that point. And he did it. So that's, again, an amazing aspect of another leader of Ballina. We find that Bernard Egan, I mentioned to you there, he only lost the 1910 election, 1,861 votes to 1,821. And he blamed the clergy, which, a bit like Trump, you have to blame somebody. But he probably was right in this case. But like I said, he nearly beat the hand-picked representative hand-picked nomination by John Redmond. So then you think, oh, well, I've got an idea now. It's a nationalist, it's a national independent, what is it? Then you find Sinn Féin, and if we all know, Sinn Féin romped through the 1918 election, like defeated the Home Rule Party, decimated the Home Rule Party, romped through. 2 years later, in Ballina, during the UDC election, the municipal elections, Sinn Féin managed 3 out of 15 seats. And P.J. Rutledge, who became the second in command to De Valera later on, he had to stand for Labour in 2 wards. So again, if you're trying to understand, what way is Ballina? Is it nationalist, Republican, Labour? What is it? It's independent, is my view. And this is no more so than proven. During 1942 to 1960, the largest block of elected candidates on the council were non-party. So there is a strong streak of independence within Ballina. I think that's fairly evident in what I just described to you there. By the way, I love this photo. See the guy over here? I don't know if he's wearing what sort of boots or socks he's wearing there, but these are councillors. These are county councillors who've come out for a photograph. So I'm not sure what he's expecting to do next, but and the guy beside him is looks very happy. So, also, anti-clerical opposition. The clergy were really powerful at this time. But we find that James J. O'Kelly in Ballina, in Muffany's Hall, so Muffany had his own hall in Ballina, and in 1892 he warned that home rule is going to be jeopardised by the appearance of the clerical element, he called it, essentially the Catholic Church. And he said basically that the appearance of the priests vindicated the claims of the English, essentially, that the Irish Parliament would be dominated by the priests of Ireland. In 1892 he said this, and this is a Home Rule MP saying this. Meanwhile, also saying this, if we flick down to the very bottom one then, Godfrey Featherstone Hall, lovely name, he was a very good friend of Carson. He was a Unionist MP for North Fermanagh, but he lived out the road in Morgana. And the reason is North Fermanagh was so solidly orange, you didn't have to worry about living there. But he also claimed that the Catholic Church was grasping at political power, and he warned that only the Union could protect people against it. So here is he, a strong Unionist MP, agreeing with the Home Rule MP that the Catholic Church could interfere in the Irish Parliament. But then you turn around and you find Godfrey Featherstone Hall defending Archdeacon Kilkenny in Claremorris against another Home Rule MP, Conor O'Kelly. So rather than understand patterns or anything else, just understand it's independence. It's the ability to think and act independent and not stick to party lines. I think that, again, is an element of North Mayo and Ballina in particular. Finally, I want to come to farmers and town labourers. So that's the people at the top. That's the rich people who can afford to seek election. What about the people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder? And we find here labourers and farmers. And in 1919, during the War of Independence, labourers in Ballina and Crossmolina embarked on a huge strike. It was huge. Over 300 labourers held up all of Ballina. And to understand what that meant, they meant that basically would not allow any loading or unloading of carts. In fact, you find the labourers and the farmers actually even went as far as to look for plans to open a co-op that farmers could, with the labourers, sell their produce directly to the public. In fact, IRA activist Thomas Jordan said this, and I like this idea. He called on labourers and farmers to work together in the struggle against the economic system, what made the small man small and the big man big. Again, showing this independent streak. So, just a few more minutes. All that said, Liam, what happened? And I have a question mark, decline of a town. So look at Ballina's population. So remember I said Ballina's population, 1831, you'll see it more clearly in a second. We saw it reached almost 8,000. Castlebar was always behind Ballina in population terms until very recently. So Castlebar only had a population of 6,373. The Great Famine inflicted a huge, on everywhere, a huge population loss. And we find that whereas the hinterland lost about 38% population, Ballina lost 25%. Now, a lot of people moved into Ballina seeking shelter, seeking food, so bear that in mind. And following the Free State, we find that the economic depression, which came in the 30s and it lasted into the 50s, had a detrimental effect on Ballina. Because of the hinterland suffering economically, I remember I said before, the hinterland drove the prosperity of Ballina and vice versa. So the hinterland economically suffered, and agriculture is what the hinterland was built on. It also meant Ballina suffered. And we find that the 50s, 3 out of every 5 children in Ireland left the country. The population was declining, and the West of Ireland in particular, and Ballina and North Mayo in particular. The development of motor transport saw Ballina port eventually close. In fact, World War II essentially closed it, but it never reopened, really. And then in 2002, the boundary extension saw Ballina finally be overtaken by Castlebar for the first time in 2 centuries. So here is we see Ballina's population. You can see after 1831 is its high point. It took a long time before it managed to get back up to the 8,000 level. And you can see there in 2002 where the environs in yellow were extended and Ballina then reached that point. But as I said, 2002 is when Castlebar officially replaced Ballina as the largest town in Mayo. Now, lastly, Matthew Potter, who I use a lot in this particular talk, he, economic historian, has said that essentially decline in urban government in Ireland, in many respects, is responsible for the decline in the urban economy, especially in towns, and especially in towns like Ballina. And I would argue this death of democracy, where you lose the ability to control your own affairs, has a definite knock-on effect, especially when you're trying to almost pull an airplane out of a nosedive. Ballina's going through things, but at the same time, we notice from the start of, just before the Free State, the decline in local democracy in Ballina. The ability where before we had poor law unions, rural district councils, urban district councils, and Muffany and Egan and those people who were working together, they no longer had a channel to do that. So Killala Rural District Council emerged at Ballina in 1918. Ballina Rural District Council abolished in 1925. The County Council manager assumed responsibility for Ballina in 1942. The domestic rates kicked in 1977 when they were eliminated, and as a result, all councils, local authority, lost a revenue stream and were reliant on central funding from government. And finally, Ballina Urban District Council was abolished in 2014 and replaced by a junta of the County Council, which is the municipal district. So we see here this loss of definitive ability for Ballina to be able to distinctly display its independence. However, I'll finish on this, there still is hope. Now, this is not a party political broadcast on behalf of Mark Duffy or anything like that. This is simply pointing out when Joe Biden arrived, and we're so proud of that, the amazing time, amazing event. The Americans did not know what the chairperson of the municipal district council means. It's easier for them to go the mayor of Ballina. But the way that people were able to talk about that, I heard them, I'm sure you heard them too. The ability that Ballina would have a mayor, and I think that gives hope for the future. Perhaps, if the authorities are listening, we need to go back to where Ballina can elect its own representatives, and that distinctive spirit that is Ballina gets to be expressed again. Thank you.